Hey everyone! Welcome to The Young and the Restless. I'm Jane, and I'm so excited to have you here. If you love Young and the Restless, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Alright, let's dive right in. Billy's final day in Nice was a spooky mashup of everyday events and invisible chaos. It started out like any other day but ended in a way that no one could have foreseen. The city slowly came to life as the sun rose over the French Riviera, bathing the Mediterranean in golden light and causing the waves to softly lap against the shore. Billy awoke in his tiny, brightly lighted flat, the white walls glowing softly in the morning light, the sound of scooters and street conversation bouncing off the partially open window. For a time, he stretched and massaged his eyes, and everything seemed normal, just another day in a lovely city where he had come to find calm, to escape, or maybe to vanish. However, beneath the surface, he was plagued by a persistent and black weight that had been growing heavier every day for months or even years. As the strong aroma of his coffee filled the small kitchen, he stood by the window and observed the outside world. The Promenade d'Anglais was already packed with tourists, who were laughing, taking pictures, and living in a way that was unfamiliar to him. He sipped his coffee, the harshness piercing his tongue, and reflected on the letter he had written the previous evening, words that he wasn't sure he had the guts to send, words that flowed onto paper in a desperate, furious scribble. His reflection in the window glass was hollow-eyed and pale, and his hands trembled a little as he put down the mug. Months earlier, he had lost the ability to recognize himself. Wearing shorts and a loose linen shirt, he walked out of the apartment, shutting the door behind him as though it were important, as though he would never come back. With the aroma of freshly baked bread and salt air blending in the warm breeze, Nice streets were a riot of color and sound. Unguided, he strolled past sidewalk cafes where people clinked glasses of rose, past street musicians playing upbeat tunes that seemed like a counterpoint to the static in his head, and toward the lake. Impossibly blue and impossibly broad, the promenade spread before him, the sea glistening in the sunlight. He paused close to the water's edge and observed the waves as they came in, their rhythm constant and uninteresting. A child with a bright red balloon tied to their wrist dashed past him, giggling. Billy's chest grew constricted. Before the fractures appeared and the voice in his head became too loud to ignore, he reflected on his own early years, when everything seemed full of possibilities. Despite his best efforts, medication, travel, treatment, and pretending, the darkness had followed him like a shadow he would never be able to escape. Nice was meant to be a new beginning, a location where the natural beauty would heal him by soaking into his soul. But in reality, there was nothing that could mend the damage that had been done to him. He took out his phone and absently scrolled through notifications and texts he had ignored. His sister's was one of them, just checking in. "When you can, give me a call. I adore you." He kept his thumb over the screen. He ought to respond. He should, he knew. What could he say, though? That he was going to drown? That it was a battle to breathe? That it was intolerable to think about tomorrow? The weight of his silence was another burden on his chest as he tucked the phone back into his pocket. By lunchtime, with the sun blazing overhead, the heat had increased. The cool liquid did little to relieve the constriction in his throat, so he purchased a bottle of water from a kiosk and drank half of it at once. He strolled into the ancient town, where tall buildings shaded the winding lanes and the air was heavy with the aroma of flowers and spices. He stopped in front of a tiny bookshop with French and English language books in the display, their spines arranged like promises of freedom. He briefly contemplated stepping inside and lost himself in someone else's tale, but the idea vanished as fast as it had appeared. He was no longer distracted by fiction. Even though he wasn't hungry, he got a croissant and another coffee at a small cafe off the main street. As he picked at the flaky pastry at a little table, his thoughts strayed to the drugs he had been hoarding in his apartment for weeks, just in case. In case the agony got too intense. In case he was unable to find another cause to continue. He understood the irony that he would make his ultimate choice in Nice, a city known for its beauty and happiness. Then, it might have made sense. Perhaps it was preferable to say farewell in a lovely place. As the sun started to set, the afternoon faded away and the shadows grew longer. The promenade was less crowded, the sky was striped with pink and orange, and he was back near the sea. He listened to the waves, which were both calming and unrelenting, while he sat on the pebbled beach. The locations he would never see, the people he would never become, the activities he would never do were all on his mind. Both the anguish and the sheer weariness of fighting a battle that no one else could see were too much to bear. The lights along the promenade came to life as dusk descended over the city, softly illuminating the stones. Billy brushed sand off his clothes and stood for a final glance at the ocean. The waves rolled in with a soft, relentless cadence, and the sea was suddenly dark. He turned and left, moving slowly but purposefully. When he returned to his apartment, the silence pressed in around him and the air was still. On the table, nicely folded, was the note he had left behind. He placed it down after picking it up and stroking the folds with his fingers. Nothing else could be said. With the pills waiting in the drawer he had concealed them in, he made his way to the restroom. The visage he saw in the mirror was that of a stranger, tired, haggard, and resigned. He didn't turn his head. There was stillness for the remainder. As if nothing had changed, the Mediterranean sparkled as the sun rose over Nice the following morning. Billy, however, was gone, somewhere in the city, in a peaceful apartment with the shutters still closed. The startling cause? It wasn't a crime or an accident, but a hurt so intense and imperceptible that he couldn't escape it, not even in a town as lovely as Nice. The tragedy was not only that he died, but also that nobody realized how much pain he was in until it was too late. Billy Abbott's final day in Nice was supposed to be lovely, even uneventful, the kind of day when the water hummed a lullaby against the coast and the sun kissed the Riviera with the perfect amount of warmth. When Billy stepped out onto the balcony of the suite he had rented, the mist from the early morning had just begun to clear, and he looked out at the beach, where the soft waves glistened in the sunlight. He appeared peaceful to everybody observing. Billy's heart, however, was a silent storm on the inside. He had come to Nice to get away from Genoa City, the chaos, and the ruins of choices he couldn't go back on. He would gain understanding, possibly even atonement. Instead, he discovered something more sinister, something that had been pursuing him without his knowledge, a reality that had patiently awaited the moment to strike him unexpectedly on this last day. Billy had never been a flawless individual. He had repeatedly pushed the boundaries of commitment, ruined his own happiness, shattered hearts, and gambled with his future. However, he had not anticipated this conclusion. He spent the morning strolling about Old Town, dodging market booths and grinning at random people as if he had just regained his breath. He even gave Johnny and Katie a call and left them meaningful, lengthy messages, the kind a father might send when he suddenly realizes how fleeting life is. However, nobody could have guessed that Billy was plummeting behind those serene words and gentle smiles. Nothing had ever shaken him as much as what he had discovered the previous evening. Someone from his past had discovered him in a secluded corner of a darkened Nice bar. This was not an accident, rather, it was deliberate. Someone who wanted Billy to keep quiet for all the right reasons. Forever. The man's name was Julian Barron, which Billy found unsettling but which would not have registered in Genoa City. Billy had once met Julian, a strong, well-connected figure in the European underground scene, during one of his rash business trips overseas. Julian had made Billy an offer that seemed like it would lead to immediate financial catastrophe. Billy had abruptly backed out of the agreement out of desperation and conceit, but not before exposing Julian and left him short by millions of dollars. Billy believed he had gotten away with it at the time. He was mistaken. Julian was patient. And now his moment had arrived in the streets of Nice. It had been a short but terrifying encounter. Julian didn't have to yell or make a direct threat. "Everything has a price, Abbott," he said, taking a sip of his drink across from Billy. Additionally, you have been living on borrowed time. Billy had dismissed it with trepidation, as though comedy might cover up the shiver of terror that was running up his back. But he knew on the inside, Julian's threats weren't baseless. And despite his charisma and confidence, Billy wasn't sure he had what it took to run again. Billy went back to the hotel that afternoon and paced the suite like a man torn between two options. He put down his phone after picking it up to call Lily. Picked it up once more to give Jack a call. Nothing again. How would he respond? That a specter from the past had arrived to gather? That he was afraid to die? It wasn't as if he hadn't been warned before. However, Billy took an odd action as the sun began to set. After changing into a clean, crisp shirt, the navy blue one Victoria had mentioned once drew his attention, he took a stroll down the Promenade d'Anglais. He saw joggers moving by with music playing, visitors snapping pictures, and lovers holding hands. He appeared to be merely another man enjoying the sunset. He had written, sealed, and sent the note to Jack that morning, but no one saw him clutching the folded paper in his jacket pocket. I didn't intend for this to end the way it did, it said simply. I hope you'll tell the kids I was trying to make things right. The local police received the call at approximately 8:37 p.m. Only a few kilometers outside of the city, an American guy was discovered unconscious close to the edge of a cliffside road. Not a witness. No identification on him but a Genoa City Athletic Club card stashed in his wallet. What the paramedics could do. He had defensive cuts on his hands, evidence of a struggle, and severe head trauma. Most of his ribs were shattered by the fall. He breathed shallowly. However, Billy Abbott had left by the time they arrived at the hospital. Genoa City didn't learn until the next morning. The first person to receive the call was Jack. The suddenness of it all left him bewildered and immobilized. Only a lifeless confirmation from a hospital halfway around the world had been given, no warning, no farewell. When Lily heard, she started crying. She had never stopped loving Billy in spite of everything, including the heartache and the distance. Not at all. The worst part was not knowing if he was aware of that in his last moments. Ironically, it was Victor Newman who initially hinted that anything was wrong. He had paced the Newman ranch like a lion in a cage, saying, Billy doesn't just fall off a cliff. He is shoved. Nick, Abby, and even Phyllis concurred. Too many questions remained unanswered. Chance Chancellor quickly became involved and used his old Interpol contacts to start surreptitiously investigating the situation. The night before his death, Billy was captured on camera talking to a man wearing a gray suit. There was enough film to imply that this wasn't a terrible mishap or a robbery gone bad, but it ended just before Julian's face was fully seen. It was intentional. Chilly. Additionally, someone had ensured that no witnesses would be there. However, the footage that showed up at the Abbott residence a week later was unexpected. No return address, unmarked. A flash drive enclosed in an envelope. Jack's hands trembled as he opened it. Billy was shown on the television, sitting on the edge of his hotel bed and staring straight into the camera. He declared, "If you're watching this, then something has happened. I apologize as well. I didn't want to involve you in this issue, so I didn't inform you sooner. However, I made an improper agreement years ago. I was foolish and conceited, and I was fortunate to walk away once. However, good fortune is fleeting. Julian Barron arrived to pick me up. At least you'll know it wasn't an accident if I'm gone, even though I didn't think he would actually do it." Jack sat silently, dropping the flash disc. As it weighed heavily on his chest, tears filled his eyes. Billy was aware. Instead of running again, he had decided to face his fate in the last hours. Genoa City hosted the funeral. It was private, quiet, and full of faces that at one time or another had either loathed him or loved him. Beside his coffin, Delia's photo served as a sobering reminder of how fleeting and unpredictable life can be. Speaking through tears, Lily recalled a complex, irate, yet unforgettable man. She remarked, he never stopped believing he could be better, loved hard, and fought harder. Even when he was unsure of how. With a silent prayer in her eyes and a hand on her heart, Victoria stood at the rear. Unexpectedly, Kane also traveled in from abroad to give his sympathies to everyone who had been impacted by Billy's turbulent, passionate life journey, not just the Abbotts. Although the probe was discreet, it didn't make much headway. Julian Barron was gone. No associates willing to speak, no digital trail. He seemed to have vanished from the world. But for those who knew Billy, his death left an imprint that would never disappear. He was not flawless. However, Billy Abbott had discovered something akin to bravery on his last day of life, in the streets of Nice, confronting the specter of a history he was unable to escape. Those who knew him well would remember the man who ultimately attempted to put things right and paid the ultimate price, despite the fact that the world would remember him for his turmoil, charm, and blunders. Billy's last day alive in Nice was one that began like any other, sun-drenched, serene, and seemingly ordinary. The Mediterranean city, with its azure waters and palm-lined promenades, had always been a place of escape, a picturesque haven where life moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. But beneath the idyllic surface of that final day lay a series of events, choices, and hidden tensions that would culminate in a shocking and tragic end. To understand the full weight of what happened, it is necessary to reconstruct Billy's movements, his state of mind, and the unseen forces that led to his demise. The morning had started quietly. Billy woke in a small, nondescript apartment near the old town, a place he had rented under a false name. The walls were thin, the furniture sparse, and the only sign of life beyond his own was the distant hum of scooters weaving through the narrow streets below. He made coffee, black and strong, the way he always took it, and stood by the window, watching the early risers, shopkeepers rolling up their shutters, fishermen hauling their catch, tourists clutching maps and cameras. There was a strange calm in his demeanor, an almost eerie acceptance, as if he knew what was coming. Billy had been in Nice for just under 2 weeks, though his reasons for being there were far from the leisurely holiday one might assume. He had arrived with a purpose, one that was tied to a dangerous network of individuals who operated in the shadows of the French Riviera's glamorous facade. Nice, with its bustling port, its proximity to Monaco, and its transient population of wealthy expats and underworld figures, was the perfect place for the kind of business Billy had become entangled in. By mid-morning, he left the apartment, dressed in a light linen shirt and sunglasses, blending seamlessly into the crowd. He walked along the Promenade d'Anglais, the same stretch of coastline that had been the site of a horrific terrorist attack years earlier, a fact that now seemed grimly ironic given what was about to unfold. He stopped at a cafe, ordered another coffee, and checked his phone repeatedly. The messages were brief, coded, but their urgency was clear. Something was happening, and it was happening fast. At noon, Billy met with a contact near the port of Nice. The exchange was quick, a handoff of a small, unmarked package. No words were spoken beyond pleasantries. To any onlooker, it might have seemed like two old friends catching up. But the tension in Billy's posture, the way his eyes darted to the exits, betrayed the truth. He was being watched. And not just by the people he was working for. The afternoon passed in a blur. Billy made several more stops, a brief visit to a jewelry store in Cardor, a seemingly casual stroll through the flower market at Corsalia, a tense 5-minute conversation with a man in a parked car near Place Garibaldi. Each interaction was a piece of a larger puzzle, one that Billy himself may not have fully understood. He was a middleman, a courier, someone who knew just enough to be useful but not enough to be safe. As evening fell, Billy returned to his apartment, but he did not stay long. He packed a single bag, took one last look around, and left without locking the door behind him. It was as if he knew he wouldn't be coming back. He moved quickly now, avoiding the main streets, sticking to alleyways and less traveled routes. His destination was a quiet stretch of beach just east of the city, a place where tourists rarely ventured after dark. What happened next remains shrouded in speculation, but the facts that have emerged paint a chilling picture. Billy was met by two men, both unidentified, both professionals in the truest sense of the word. There was no struggle, no dramatic confrontation. Just a few quiet words, a nod, and then the sound of a single gunshot. Billy fell where he stood, his body left half submerged in the shallow water, the tide slowly pulling him out to sea. The shocking reason behind Billy's death was not a random act of violence, nor was it a crime of passion. It was a calculated elimination, the result of a deal gone wrong, a betrayal that had been set in motion weeks earlier. Billy had been involved in smuggling, high-value goods, possibly even people, and somewhere along the way, he had either crossed the wrong person or outlived his usefulness. The details remain murky, intentionally so. Those who orchestrated his death had the resources to ensure that the full truth would never come to light. When his body was discovered the next morning by a jogger, the initial assumption was that he had been the victim of a robbery or a drunken altercation. But the lack of identification, the absence of any witnesses, and the precision of the killing quickly suggested otherwise. The police investigation was slow, hampered by the fact that Billy had been using an alias, that his fingerprints led to no known criminal records, and that no one in Nice seemed to know who he really was. In the weeks that followed, whispers circulated in certain circles. Some claimed Billy had been working for a powerful syndicate based in Marseille. Others said he had been trying to cut ties, to disappear with whatever he had been transporting. A few even suggested that his death had been a message, a warning to others who might consider stepping out of line. But the most disturbing theory of all was that Billy had never been meant to leave Nice alive. That his entire trip, his movements, even the meetings he had taken, had all been part of an elaborate setup. That he had been lured there under false pretenses, given just enough rope to hang himself, and then disposed of with cold efficiency. Nice, with its sparkling beaches and glamorous reputation, had once again proven to be a place where beauty and brutality existed side by side. Billy's last day alive had been a carefully constructed illusion of normalcy, right up until the moment it wasn't. And the shocking reason behind his death was not just that he had been killed, but that his killing had been inevitable from the start.